Hey, Calvary kids. Well, we are back and we're on Thursday now, leading up to Easter Sunday. And so there's quite a few things the Bible tells us that Jesus did on Thursday. Most of them happened around like the evening-ish time, but we'll talk about those. So first of all, I'll show you what I drew. So I drew a tree. A very interesting looking tree. It looks kind of more like a eucalyptus tree you'd see in Africa, but imagine that looks like an olive tree. And then a loaf of bread and a cup of wine. So we'll talk about all those things in just a moment. But on Thursday, there is a super special celebration, actually, that Jesus and his disciples are getting ready to celebrate. And it's kind of almost like a holiday for people who are Jews. So it was called Passover. Now, that may sound vaguely familiar, like you may remember hearing about that a little bit, but what it celebrated was back all the way in Exodus when the Israelites were in Egypt as slaves. If you remember, the last plague God sent on Egypt was for the firstborn of every Egyptian to be killed. And the way that the people of Israel were safe from that is by putting lamb's blood on their doorposts, and that would keep them from suffering the same way the Egyptians would. The angel of the Lord would pass over their home, thus the name Passover. And they had to eat a special meal, and they had to eat it like dressed like they were ready to go on a journey, because of course originally they were getting ready to go on a journey, leaving Egypt as a free people. But even after this first time, they were supposed to continually eat it like they were getting ready to depart. But anyway, so there, Jesus and his disciples are getting ready to celebrate Passover and share this very special time of remembrance and this special meal together. Well, they get together and a few different things happen. You know, the disciples are arguing about, who's the best, like they usually do, and nobody wants to wash people's feet, and finally Jesus says he'll wash their feet, which, is crazy because this is Jesus, right? And he's willing to wash his disciples' nasty, stanky feet. And then he has a special moment. He takes a piece of bread and he breaks it and says, "This is my body broken for you," right? Which is kind of a weird thing to say, but Jesus was saying, see how I'm breaking this bread? My body is going to be hurt. It's going to be injured for you, to save you. And then he takes the wine and he says, "This cup is my blood spilled for you." Once again, kind of a weird thing to say, but once again, he's saying that like the way you pour out a cup, my blood is going to be poured out to save you. So kind of weird statements, and the disciples didn't really get it, and to us we're kind of like, oh my gosh, come on disciples, how did you not realize what he was saying? But in the moment it would have been hard for us to understand too. And the whole bread and wine thing might sound kind of familiar because we celebrate a similar thing when we take communion at the church. Of course, we use those little wafer things and grape juice instead, but the reason we have that moment of celebration, that moment of remembrance on Sundays, is to remember what Jesus did for us, to be thankful about what Jesus has done, to take a moment to apologize to God for ways we've messed up, to confess, to say, "God, I know I did this and I'm sorry," and to then celebrate in the freedom Jesus has given us because of what he's done. And that whole process of communion was started at the Last Supper when Jesus broke the bread and passed around the cup of wine. So then after the Last Supper, it's at this point too when Judas leaves to go betray Jesus, and then they go to the Garden of Gethsemane, which is a mouthful. Yeah, Gethsemane. And there would have been a lot of olive trees there. It would have been this really peaceful place. And Jesus goes off to pray. And he prays for his disciples. He prays for people in the future who would decide to follow him. And he prays that, he says, "God, if there's any other way that I can save the world, can we do that? But even if I have to do this, like, your will be done. I am willing to do it. And of course, we see as we move towards tomorrow and Easter that there wasn't another way, and Jesus is obedient to what God tells him to do, to die on the cross so that everyone can be saved. And so that's kind of why I drew these things, the bread and the cup for the Last Supper, and then of course the tree for the Garden of Gethsemane. And so Jesus prayed a lot. It wasn't like he just prayed at the Garden of Gethsemane. Through his whole time on earth, through his whole ministry, of helping people and healing people, he prayed a lot. And so that's an example that it's good for us to follow, Calvary Kids. So a little activity I thought you could do. So this looks like a book, but it's actually not. It's like got a secret compartment. You don't have to have a book with a secret compartment to do this, but I wrote on like some sticky notes a bunch of like prayer requests, like people to pray for, things to pray for, stuff like that. So I encourage you, Calvary Kids, maybe if you've learned how to write, you can write down a few things you'd like to pray for, maybe tell your parents and they can write it down for you, and then put it in like a cup or a book with a secret compartment or a bowl, and then whenever you as a family pray, just pick a few of them out and pray for them. So like one I've gotten here for me is not to be worried. And so whenever Chelsea and Naomi and I pray together, maybe I'll pull this one out and I'll pray for us not to be worried. Or I've got like my parents in here and Chelsea's parents in here. I've got the families that are in our small group in here. Nurses is one I have in here. So just as a family, write down a few different things, a few people that you want to pray for, and you can have your own little like bowl or cup or whatever of prayer requests ready for whenever you as a family pray together. So that's what happens today, the Last Supper in the Garden of Gethsemane. Woof, like I said, it's a mouthful. Garden of Gethsemane. So tune in again tomorrow, Calvary Kids, and we'll hear about easily the saddest part of the Easter story, but tomorrow, which is Good Friday. So see you, Calvary Kids.